So we got people with questions. I don't know if it was there. We're going to do the questions.
Want to alternate or? Yeah, I mean, we can do a few questions.
Thank you for this conversation. It's been really good to hear. Touching on the points about community, it's been a topic in the, I guess, theistic conversation that has been growing in importance to me personally in the last year or so. So it's good to hear these parts of the discussion here now. The Humanist Society kind of turned me onto that concept. So my question is, in the last couple of years, something that I've seen in the one-on-one conversations that I have is a growing number of people that had identified as atheist and then are going back to identifying as religious, not because of a belief in the God, but for the community and the simple moral reasons, which is something I've personally seen more. It's very anecdotal, but I was wondering if it's something that you've encountered, either of you, and how you address something like that.
I love the people who say, oh, I used to be an atheist, because I want to have a conversation with them, because I want to find out how and why they were an atheist and what changed their mind. Because if Seth comes to me someday and says, I'm now a theist, he has all of my attention. Probably more than he wants. But we had one fairly popular atheist, Teresa McBain, who left religion and came out at the Reason Rally on stage, and kind of a darling of the atheist. Here's a woman pastor who's now an atheist, and instead of me trying to tell the story, there were various issues, but she went back to religion. But Seth was closer to her than I was, so I'll let you.
Yeah, I got the sense that she never quite found her footing outside the church and found greater comfort going back to what was familiar. Now, I don't know what's going on inside Teresa's head, but I can see the theist going, see, there's somebody who was an atheist and they returned back to Jesus. But knowing Teresa as much as I did, and seeing her story, I see reflections of it in perhaps the rare other instances where I see somebody who may have been a non-believer, but they returned to the community of church. I mean, when we ask people to leave their religion, we're not just asking them to leave their dogma. We're asking them to leave the place that knows their name every Sunday morning and welcomes their kids and has community breakfast and visits them in the hospital and brought them groceries when they have a problem, and where they hang out on Wednesdays, and where they go to find family and comfort and friendship and those types of things. It's an entire social network. Community is really the one thing that I think people struggle with when they leave. And I have a theory that many people who return, the few I've ever seen who actually return to a faith, do so for reasons of community. They do it for reasons of comfort.
Her letter, she put a letter, it was about missing the music, missing the community, things like that. I remember this specifically because, she stayed at my house and everything else. I contacted Seth right away as soon as I read it, and I knew he was closer than I was. And I asked him if he could maybe arrange to have her and I on The Thinking Atheist so that I could debate her reasons for doing that. And then I realized, and he pointed it out, and I agreed that wasn't necessarily the right way to go about it, and the reasons that she'd given were personal. But
I don't see an exodus of people especially those who've come out of the church, going back. I mean, would any of you, which pill do you take to go back to the Matrix? Would you take that pill again? I would rather live a harder reality than a happy fantasy. It is actually more satisfying, even despite the difficulties, to be outside of the faith, knowing all that I know. I would never want to go back. And I really, when I run into people like you, and like Matt, and like wherever I speak to people, they are the same way. There's no way I'd want to rejoin the club and check out intellectually and cheat myself of living in the real world. I'd never want that. So I don't see, despite the community challenge, which we as atheists, rationalists, agnostics, humanists, whatever your label is, we struggle here, and we need to definitely work on the community aspect of it. We're asking people to leave a community. What are we giving them in return? What are we providing? What kind of a net are they going to land in whenever we have, our doors open? And I think, we need to do a better job of putting aside many of the petty differences we have, some of the politics that we have within groups, some of the sort of this pride that we take in being independent thinkers, the cat that cannot be herded, and realize there are people out there tremendously hurting who need. We're social creatures. We're communal creatures. Most of us need someone. We need each other. We are better together. We'll get more done together. And I would like to see us do a better job of having a soft place to fall for those who are walking away from the faith.
And I'm going to add something. Take it however you want. This is a pretty white room, and there's two white guys sitting up on this stage. One of the ways to... I saw you, brother, and I'm thrilled. We're in a curious position as atheists because we're working towards our own unemployment. When religion goes away, we have to find new jobs. Now, I think my job is pretty secure for at least the rest of my life. So the smart thing for me to do is just to keep accepting every time, humanist, free thought, secular group wants to have me come speak. But I'm going to encourage all of you within your groups with events like this. As much as Seth and I love coming here doing this, and we would be happy to come back, don't have us back until you have other speakers in similar circumstances who fall into marginalized categories that aren't just atheist. Have people of color on, get women up here, get the LGBT community represented, because one of the reasons that this room may be fairly white is because we are. And so if we're going to break down those barriers, people want to come and attend and spend time when they see themselves represented. Now, if I never work again, because every speaking engagement I had goes to Mandisa Thomas, cool. I can still do my little TV show from Austin, Texas, and never show up anywhere again. But we've got to do a better job of that. And that's how you build and grow communities. And it's not like there's a quota or a diversity checkbox, But I live in Austin, Texas, and there's a massive Hispanic population in Austin. How Hispanic is the atheist community of Austin? Not very. And I can't do anything about that because I can't go into the Hispanic neighborhoods and start knocking on the door. Hola. The gringo is here to save you from Jesus. I would have rosaries embedded up my butt, and it'd just be terrible.
That's a t-shirt. The gringo is here to save you from Jesus. This gentleman over here, go ahead. Pedro, yeah, go ahead.
All right.
Speaking of
Microphone.
Speaking
nice
of
and close.
Vegetables. Anyways, first I have one comment and I have a question. But first, okay. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
I'm so glad that I met you, and you too. All right.
Thank you, Pedro.
I'm washing my hands for about a month.
Oh, go my God.
Okay, but if I'm sick, you're going to get it too.
Okay. Earlier, Seth was talking about your mom. So he was talking about your mom. And then at the end, he says, what am I missing? So I was thinking, you answer. My mom is nuts. Wait a minute. What does that mean? He said, my mom's nuts or my mom's nuts?
Oh. That's a way better joke than I deserve.
I have no response to that.
Okay.
I have no response. I can't contribute.
It did confuse me though. It's like, wait, what did he mean? He really meant that his mom's nuts?
Yeah, and by the way, one of the reasons that I backed off from that wasn't just because I'm worried about trash talking my mom, but it was because something else you said, where people seem to have this idea that religion is mental illness, which we already talked about. It's not. Just get over it. Nobody's a perfect thinker. We all make mistakes. Most of us in the room made those mistakes. If it's not in the DSM, stop pretending that it is. Wait, is it DSM? Yeah, okay.
DSM-5?
Yeah.
The Diagnostic and Statistical Manual,
It's basically a way to catalog mental health issues. Schizophrenia, psychopathy, etc. And we use crazy and nuts and all these as colloquials, and hopefully people realize that we're not actually claiming that it's mental illness, but I'm trying to back off from using those words as much as I can, both because there are ableism concerns and also because it's just inaccurate.
Good answer. Okay, my question real quick, and it's short. My question is, I've seen many of your videos on YouTube, of course, and there's something I missed what you mean by when you say that we do not pick our choices or something like that, and that we don't make our own choices.
The belief isn't a choice.
But if, like, say I want to join the military, then I made my own choice to go into the military? Wasn't that my choice, or why?
So choice in the sense that you are the agent who decided to do that. But what made you want to do that? What convinced you that it was a good idea? Mm-hmm. When I say belief isn't the result of a choice, I mean in any simple sense. Like, I couldn't choose to believe that gravity doesn't work. But I could become convinced that gravity doesn't work, and I could become convinced to varying degrees for good reasons or bad reasons. But I don't just decide I'm going to believe Jesus is real. And this is, you hear this in a song, I have decided to follow Jesus. Yes, you as an agent, probably without free will, at least in the sense we normally talk about it, decided to follow Jesus. But your belief, that thing that you accept, is always the result of becoming convinced. It just may be that you have really terrible criteria for what convinces you. Like, everybody else believes it, I'm going to go with it. And it feels like a decision because so many things we do are a decision. But I'm talking about something very specific in beliefs don't exist in a vacuum in your head. They're the result of some thought process other than just, this is what I want. Because if we all believed the things we want, well, this world would be a mess. I mean, I don't want to say that.
Now, did you just decide not to finish that sentence?
Yes. But it wasn't an act of free will.
Did you believe you were going to not finish that sentence?
Not when I started it, but I became convinced that I shouldn't finish it.
This stuff just cooks my noodle. Go ahead, ask a question, give a comment, and we'll see what we can do.
All right. My name is Aaron, and I'm a huge disappointment to my family.
Hang on, maybe he's a serial killer.
That'd be a lot more interesting than my story. You guys have talked about it quite a bit, and I appreciate the comments thus far. But how do you suggest that we connect with people who are still firmly in their religion? I'm the youngest of 7 kids in a Mormon family, and they're all extremely active in the church and have positions of leadership in the church, and they do all the right things as far as my parents are concerned. And it wouldn't matter so much if my parents weren't the next house down the street. And until last week, 5 of the 7 children lived in the same zip code here in Arizona. And so there's this immense pressure to conform, which I'm not going to. And I have a hard time having a relationship with anyone in my family. It's like trying to be best friends with flat earthers when I just could never do that. And that's been difficult because I've lost all the relationships I had with church people. Dropped me like a hot potato, of course. And that was our social structure, was the church and family. And now I feel kind of abandoned from both of those groups in a way.
Do you feel abandoned because you disagree or because there's sort of an emotional blackmail happening on their end?
Definitely the emotional blackmail from my mom especially. She's the offender, but she's doing what she thinks is best and right. And, you know, my dad, when I came out to them, basically wasn't so veiled of a threat that my life was going to fall to pieces and I would, you know, regret this for the rest of my life and be in outer darkness away from everything I cared about in the end.
Prove them wrong.
Sorry?
Prove them wrong.
I am so far.
Do you have kids?
I have one.
I didn't say this. Grandparents really want to spend time with their grandkids. And you're allowed to set boundaries as a parent with regard to how people are going to treat each other in the vicinity of your kids.
And that's...
And I know there are people who look at it and say, oh, that's manipulative and below the belt. No. I've watched grandparents who have lost their child, grown person, to atheism, and they are secretly some of the most nefarious people about making sure that they're teaching their grandkids stuff on the sly, and they will lie straight to your face, and it's because they think they're doing something that's necessary and good. My thing is, try and have the right reasons, be open to discussion when you're open to, set the ground rules. If it's not going well, stick a pin in it and come back to the conversation when people are ready for it. But you don't owe anybody, including family members, an explanation for who and what you are. And they're either going to treat you and respect you like a person, or they don't get to spend time with you if that's the boundary you draw. It's not going to be easy. I get emails and messages from kids who've been disowned by their parents, including kids still in high school. And we've had to relocate some of them with other family members and stuff. And it's not anything to laugh at, because I know people who've described this as if everybody died and they're going to be grieving forever. But Jen Peoples taught me something early on when she was on the show, that your family, when you act like family, whether you're blood related or not, which should be incredibly obvious, as both my wonderful niece and nephew are adopted. They're not related to us by blood. And I couldn't have asked for a better niece and nephew. Those kids are fucking awesome. And I'm happy to be around people and treat them as family and interact with them when they act like family. And if we're related and you're crappy, bye, Felicia.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Just a side note, my 6.5-year-old son doesn't know who Jesus is.
So are you saying he's a fundamentalist Christian? Some of these jokes write themselves, guys. I didn't do any work.
Go ahead.
All right. Hi, my name is Vigil. I'm the local militant atheist, I guess. So the best arguments I get, there aren't any good ones on their side, but the best I get out there is presuppositionalism and this you have to borrow from my worldview. So I'm wondering if you can just discuss your angle on that currently. I've read you on YouTube. So I've seen as recent as I can find, but I'd like to hear where you're at right now, arguing with those guys, because they're the only ones who seem to be giving it an intellectual effort at all. The rest of them, it's all emotion. So
I don't know if precept's an intellectual effort. I was thinking about it. But it's interesting to me that the precept argument isn't even a theistic argument, but it's presented by theists. It's
apart from the fact that they presuppose God as an explanation for all the things that we don't appear to have explanations for.
their specific God with a proper name.
Yeah.
But that's the leap they make after
Yeah.
they have the absolute moral standard, the absolute logical standard, or all those types of things.
It's not quite that sloppy when it's done right. So most people are more familiar with most people in this room are probably more familiar with presuppositionalism because of my debate with Cy. The problem is that Cy doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. He's just cribbing Greg Bahnsen and other actual thinkers. There is a process that you can get to where you can basically say, in order for reasoning to be grounded, there must be some guarantor, and what kind of characteristics would that guarantor have? And so we're going to presuppose God is the explanation for this. And then they get on to their specific God.
It's usually a setup. They'll say, is rape wrong? And you say yes. And they go, well, how do you know that? Well, because there's an absolute standard put in place, meaning that there must be an absolute standard bearer somewhere, that bearer being their specific pet God. And then they've taken a leap, though, from the standard itself to their specific deity.
Yeah, and the borrowing from my worldview is basically just an assertion that they're right and they can't be wrong. And so they're basically not engaging in any sort of discussion on that front. You can try till you're blue in the face saying, well, no, actually you're borrowing from my worldview because I merely presuppose the logical absolutes of identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle, and you're presupposing something a step further, and via Occam's razor, you're the one that's violating that, and blah, blah, blah. But you'll get in a vicious circle like that because anytime you're using reasoning to try to justify reasoning, there is a flaw. There has to be some presupposition. And in my case, I just presuppose that the laws of logic are true and inviolate until they can be demonstrated otherwise. In the same way, there's no solution to welcome to Philosophy 101. In the same way, there's no solution to the problem of hard solipsism. I can't prove I'm not in the matrix or a brain in a vat. I can't prove that this is real. They'll claim that they've solved it. I think the best way I did that was responded to it was in that actual debate. If you get them to recognize that they are a flawed thinker, they are a fallen creature, even under their own model, that they are not a perfect thinker. And so that makes them a dirty filter. And even if there is a God that could try to pour pure white paint through that dirty filter, what comes out is not white paint. So even if they were correct that there was a God who was providing the foundation for reasoning, that God could never make them epistemically justified in accepting that because they are a dirty filter, which they've already recommended. And that's as close as you can get to shutting them down. And I just don't waste that much time with precepts anymore.
I don't waste my time much with apologists. I mean, what worthy and benevolent deity needs a human, the same species that screwed up everything else on the planet to explain what he wants us to be, do, think, feel, whatever. I also have another question very quickly that stems off of that. I know that a lot of people who are atheist activists are still talking about the Kent Hovens of the world, the Ken Hams, the Ray Comfort and whatnot. But I don't see those people relating a lot to the lives of everyday Christians that I bump into. I mean, the Christians I know, they don't give a shit about that Ray Comfort. They may not even know who he is. Part of me wonders if a lot of the atheist activism that I see that focuses on these apologists is actually fueling their notoriety, helping them by keeping them in the spotlight, where without us, they would have long ago faded into complete irrelevance.
Absolutely. So I will say absolutely. Who knows who Steven Anderson is? None of you should know who he is. His church is smaller than Westboro. But because he puts shit up on YouTube and atheists freak out, because here's the thing. Here's the dirty little secret. The internet's wonderful. The internet provides. It's how I make my living. It's the only reason any of you know who I am. But if you see somebody and there's a camera pointed at them and they appear to be talking to a room of people, one of the questions is there anybody else there? Because there might not be. When I'm at home shooting my stuff, there's nobody else there. Oh, wait, I just made myself irrelevant.
No.
But this is what we do. It's great that the internet provides anybody, every single one of us, with a voice where if you can do it right, you can be on footing with anybody, on even footing. I did a bunch of events. I did one here in Phoenix with Sam Harris. It's got one of the most popular podcasts on the planet. And we sit down, we have a conversation, and Sam and I get along, and we go out for drinks afterwards. And my thing is, I don't ever get starstruck, or almost never. And I'm just a regular person, and if somebody doesn't treat me as a regular person, I don't care how famous they are or popular, they can go fuck themselves, because we should just all hang out, cool. But nobody needs to know and would know who Steven Anderson is if it weren't for the internet. And yet, that same thing is true for us. It's a good thing and a bad thing, and what we have to do is start asking the right question. I'm actually shooting a video this week on asking the right questions. Spoiler alert, I'm going to reference the guy who called in to say, if God didn't create the universe, who did? a CNN thing that said, why do atheists inspire such hatred? And an interesting question that I would hope that a good many of you will immediately know the answer to, but so many people don't. Why does a mirror reverse things left to right but not top to bottom? I'm not going to answer it here, but it's the wrong question. I don't know what the hell that had to do with his question. I went off on a tangent.
I'm still stuck in the mirror. I'm doing that in my mind. I'm like, hey, wait a minute.
It'll mess with you for a while, and then at some point, either you'll figure it out or somebody will explain it to you, and you'll be like,
Please, come on up.
Hi, my name is Erica, and I hope you guys don't mind me bringing the topic back to families again. But I am a recent deconvert within the last year, and I recently came out to my parents. And I mean, I guess it could have gone as well as you expected. They said, "We love you, we're not surprised." And I'm like, okay. But they also just kept changing the subject to something else. They didn't really want to talk about it. Whereas I was like ready to talk about the issues and really get into it. And they just kind of like said, "We love you no matter what," and then kind of kept brushing me off. And I'm wondering, like, how can I open up the conversation to them for something that they think, like, I think they think is just too difficult to deal with, so they're, putting it to the side, whereas I really want to, talk to them about this stuff.
What do you mean by conversation? Are you wanting to explain your position and how you got to where you are, or are you trying to convince them, or something else?
Honestly, it's just talking about it at all. So what I did was I spent hours writing a letter to them, just explaining, why and how and I got to my position. And I didn't get a whole lot of, questions back from them. And it's just, I'm like, what questions do you have? Like, do you want to talk about why I think like I do? And it's just, they kind of kept switching the subject. And I'm not looking to convert them. I'm just looking to have an open dialogue about this thing that was a huge part of our life, for decades.
you desperately need them to know who you are.
Yes, that's
All
exactly
of
how I
us
feel.
need that. And it's incredibly frustrating because it goes both ways. So I was talking to somebody a minute ago. On the atheist experience, I don't make outgoing calls. And I don't go door to door. I have the conversations with the people who want to. And because of that, there was a period of time where I knew my parents didn't want to have the conversation, so I didn't. I'm going to respect their boundaries in the same way that I would hope they would respect mine. Unfortunately, it has to be that way from your side as well. And yet, the real problem here is that we live in a society with religious normalcy, where the default position is the assumption that you're a believer, like the woman on the plane who, you're going to teach them about the Bible, go get them. You move to a new town and it's, hey, what church do you go to? Have you visited a church? You want to go to my church? There's just this assumption because religion has this privileged position where it's the default thing to go to. When you're in that position, when you're in the minority position, I get it. For years, I wanted nothing more than for my parents to properly, fully understand who I am and why I believe what I believe. Because I know that they don't know either. And now, after all these years, they never really will. That 6-hour conversation with my mom over Christmas, which started with Trump, boy, that was a fucking nightmare. And ended with Jesus. A day later, my mom, because we talked about the Bible a bit, came up to me and she said, "Honey, I want to ask you something." And I was like, okay. And she said, "I think I understand what you're saying is, if I talk to you about what the Bible says, that doesn't carry any weight because you don't believe the Bible's the Word of God." And I was like, hallelujah. I only said it 25 different ways over the 6 hours that we were having this conversation. And how hard is it for that light bulb to go off? I probably said those exact words at some point. But it also gives me hope. I don't think I'm ever going to change their mind. I don't think they're ever really going to know or understand. But I got something through. And now I know it's harder for them to go, God's just given him over to a reprobate mind. Devil's got a hold of our son. It's, oh, wait, he's not convinced of this. And that forces them to think about what might convince me, which for some people we'll force them to think about why are they convinced, which is the right question. We talk about on the show, tell us what you believe and why, but the more important of those two is why, and even more important than that is, why should anybody else agree with you? I don't have a good answer for you to get what you want. The closest I can do is say, you did the right thing in writing that and letting them know that you were open to conversation. Don't harp on it. Someday, something's going to happen, and they're going to ask you a question about who you are and about what you believe. It's going to come out of the blue. It's going to be in a side conversation about something. And instead of leading with, I'm an atheist and here's why, just be yourself and let them know that you still care about them, and you hope that they care enough about you to show an interest in who you actually are and that you're not closed to this. That's as close as I can get.
Is that a prophecy?
It is if it comes true. Because as we know from the Gospels...
Thank you, Erica. I had to grieve a little bit I had these ideas in my mind. If only I explained it better the next time, they'll get it.
Yeah.
And I had to come to a point in my life where I thought, if I can't control, what I'm doing is, to a degree, I was putting on myself the responsibility for changing their minds, for getting them to accept me, for getting them to be open enough to at least sponge up these new ideas and try to have a measure of perspective. And I became so frustrated. I remember my father was telling me, the atheist has no joy. The atheist has no joy in his life. And I'm like, I have so much joy in my life, Dad. I'm doing what I love. I'm wired in with people who are just amazing and have had opportunities that I can't describe. And I've got a beautiful family, and I've never been so centered, and I'm in a great place. And he responded, this was a text, he's like, no, you're not. Yeah, he was, I was saying, if only I explained it better, if only I just painted the picture in full Vista Vision color, he would, and the truth is, I was trying to, I had taken the responsibility of making him get it. And all I can do is paint the picture. I can't make him see the portrait.
My dad did the same thing except with love. I was worried that he was going to think that I couldn't be moral. And he's like, no, of course you can. God writes his moral code on everybody's heart, whether you're a believer or not, so you can be moral. But God is love, and that means you can't love anybody, son, and that makes me sad that you'll never love anybody. And I said, well, I love you, Dad. And then I set about to make sure that he saw me love my wife, love my niece and nephew, love everybody, and that it was just genuinely, this is how I feel. Because I know that's going to put him in a position where there's a conflict in his head. But on that note of, if only I said it different. I did the same thing for years. Let me find that magic bullet argument. Let me just see if I can do it. This is why I've done the atheist experience for 15 years, because something in the back of my head's like, you're going to get it right next time. You're going to get it right next time. You're going to get it right next time. Well, I've done it for 15 years. You've been doing this about that long. Not to blow our own trumpets, we got it right over and over and over again. At some point, it's not our problem, it's them, because I have no expertise in really much of anything. Oh yeah, I got subpoenaed as an expert in the Bible, but that's bullshit. If I have expertise in anything, it's about taking complex topics and making them accessible to anyone and everyone, which is why I spend so much time talking about philosophy. And if I can do that, and countless people can change their mind, and thousands upon hundreds of thousands of people are watching these things that you're putting out, I'd have to say, sorry, we are in fact good at explaining things. We're not always going to get it right. And at some point, the weight is on them and not on us.
What I really like too is, it's not really like with my mother and father. I'm more interested in the people who are in the offshoot, the other branches of the family tree, right? Well, because I know the kind of conversations that are taking place. Well, the atheist, Seth, they can't have joy, but I have plenty of it.
Yeah.
Atheists can't have a true family. Well, I've got an amazing family. Atheists can't have purpose in their lives, but I've self-generated purpose. I'm doing what I feel like I really am. I have much purpose in my life. I'm messing up their categories.
Oprah said we couldn't experience wonder.
Yeah.
So
what happens is that, once the nephews and the nieces and other people hear these things, and then they look over for evidence of the claims that Seth has a really shitty life and he is not having any fun and he doesn't love people and he doesn't have goodness and joy and he's not living his best life, and they instead see somebody who's pretty centered and who feels more comfortable in his own skin than he's ever felt and is doing what he loves and is communicating and connecting with people all around the world who have become members of his family. Tilt, they just can't process. And so there's great utility, I think, in being a living example of all of the goodness that the believers say that we cannot possess as non-theists, and embracing and owning that. And other people, they're not going to be able to jam that square peg into the round hole. And hopefully that'll bring them to a point of critical mass where perhaps when they go through some doubts in their own lives, they come scratching on your door.
Amen.
Let's make these real fast, and then I want to make sure that we sort of put an exclamation point on it before we lose the room. How long do we have, my friend?
One or two more quick questions.
Okay, go ahead.
Cool. So first things first, I think that his name was Aaron. As a fellow ex-Mormon and parental disappointment, I can relate to you. So if you want to talk afterwards, I'll be out there.
Well, this is a self-help meeting. I'm a happy guy.
But my question to you guys revolves around community. As has been mentioned a few times, a lot of people find a sense of community, a sense of good, a sense of purpose in religion. I personally believe that religions across the world offer a unique set of negatives that aren't found in other organizations. And in my journey leaving Mormonism, I had a lot of people say to me, okay, but think about all the good that Mormonism does. And I'm wondering if there's a point, in your guys' opinion, at which the good outweighs the bad, that would kind of rationalize it in your brain for someone to stay rather than go.
No.
I expected to get that from you.
Keep the good and get rid of the bad.
Yeah.
Nobody's ever been able to give me an example of anything that's true and good that can only be achieved by religion.
What was it, Hitchens who said, name for me a right and moral action that could be done by a believer that could not also be done by a non-believer?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you.
And by the way, thank you. I'm in favor of keeping the good and true wherever you find it. And there are plenty of things that are good and true within religions, because religions are the product of people, and there are plenty of things that are good and true that come from people.
That's why one of the terrible arguments I hear by atheists is that, churches, like all pastors, are these greedy people living skating on a tax-free income, when they don't realize that most pastors make a pretty meager wage and work some serious hours as private servants of their church. And another one is that churches are greedy. They only do charity because they want an excuse to buy their way into heaven. When the truth is, a lot of churches are genuinely charitable because they are filled with human beings who grieve over the needs of needy people. But they have a religious framework for the giving that they do. But all the giving that they are responsible for, all that is the product of human hands. We could remove the supernatural aspect of it, and what do you have? You have humanism. And so that's something. Go ahead.
I just want to start off by thanking both of you. 20 years ago, I was in a severe car accident while I was in the Navy. I was a corpsman, and I was in a coma. And about 6 months of brain rehab after that. Not to interrupt, but I remember like a couple weeks ago, you had someone call in, or you talked about someone that had a coma, that a friend. I personally had a coma, and before that, one of the proudest moments of my boot camp time was seeing the RC on my doc tags. I remember being so proud of being Roman Catholic. I was so proud of that. I was a devout Christian / Roman Catholic. After my coma, when I woke up, during the rehab, I didn't lose my faith, so to speak. It's not like something switched, but what it did to me, it made me question, because by the way, my car accident was strictly cognitive. I got discharged from the military, 100% disability. I had a severe, learning disability. I couldn't remember things. And that aggravated me so much where I did my own due diligence because the doctors weren't telling me anything more than what tests can show. I wanted to know why. So that opened me up to the internet. And due to the spider web of YouTube, I discovered you, Matt. And through that, I discovered Seth. And both of you guys, not some scientific website, not a doctor, and almost majority you, Matt, you enabled me to understand cognition. You enabled me to understand not what was wrong with me, but how to deal with it. And by accident, I became an atheist. So you are kind of, so now, to lighten the question, so you used to have a guy named Mark he lived in Austin, and
Mark from Stone Church.
Yeah, and he was like a regular.
Yeah.
And he seemed like a good-hearted person. I mean, just the way it seemed. Like he really wanted to know, but he was just so confused. And I just didn't ever hear any more. So Did you ever hear back from him? And on top of that, piggyback on that, do you often get callers that you've had on the show call in maybe a year, even email maybe, and say, you know what? You've changed me. Like you've changed me. Like, have you ever had anyone, maybe even call? Like, have you ever had anyone on the show call and give their story? Hey, 2 years ago I talked to you, Matt. Or I talked to Tracy or whoever, and I'm calling back to let you know. Wow, you guys, it took me a couple years, but I always went back to that. Have you ever had anyone?
So there's a lot to unpack there, and I'll try to get to it quick. First of all, thanks for the kind words. I'm glad if anything I've ever said has been helpful to anybody. Mark from Stone Church, I'm going to break your heart, was a prank caller who wasn't real. However, the guys at Stone Church found out about it. And I went to lunch with one of the associate pastors, and I'll finish with that story in a second. But to answer your other question, people do email in. There was a guy who was like, oh, I used to call in all the time, and I thought you were an asshole. But eventually I got tired of calling, but I didn't stop watching. I just sat there and watched the show and took notes to prove you wrong. And now I'm an atheist. That happens. Because as soon as they're not under the gun and they're able to sit back and think in that protected space, it's more likely for them to change their mind. I don't know that anybody's actually called in to say it, but it's possible. 15 years, who knows? But the associate pastor from Stone Church, Mark was saying things that just weren't true. He was suggesting that the youth group at the church was like all into my videos, and that the church had done something to like prohibit them watching it. I don't know. The associate pastor and I went to lunch at a Red Robin, and we became kind of fast friends. And Stone Church is a Calvinist church, and so we had really good conversations about free will, because at the time I'm still a compatibilist, but I don't say we have free will anymore. But Calvinists don't believe in free will. Basically, God dictates the things. And I remember saying, okay, well, then why do you proselytize? And he said, because I don't have any choice. And I loved it. And we were instant friends. And we had scheduled, he was getting ready to go off and do some mission work. And we were going to have lunch when he got back. And I didn't hear from him. And months and months and months go by. And then somebody shows me a newspaper article. And he was killed by an IED in Afghanistan, I think it was. And I spent a lot of time sitting at the house trying to figure out, do I go to this guy's funeral and introduce myself to his wife? Ultimately, I didn't go. She and I had never met. And I think it was a mistake. Not because I would have been going there to proselytize on behalf of atheism, because I think she needed to know that two people with opposing views had lunch, became fast friends, were going to have a lot more conversation, and they were robbed of it. And there's a part of me that wanted to say they were robbed of it because your religion sent him out into a dangerous area to do this mission work, and he died. And that's the reason I didn't go. Because that's not what needed to be said. What needed to be said is, despite the fact that we disagreed, we laughed and we had fun conversations. And even if neither of us ever moved the needle on the other one's position, that's still true. I wish he'd survived. I wish we could have done some more lunches. He was a great guy. And we only knew each other for a couple of hours. So while there are prank callers to the show, and I can't always tell who they are, so I treat every caller as if it's real, because Poe's law says there's nothing so ridiculous that a prank caller could say that some true believer out there, actually would believe it. But I feel robbed because I engage with a lot of preachers and apologists. Some of them are disingenuous. Some of them are sincere. I don't know that there was ever anybody that I had better conversation with in such a short period of time. And I'm going to be pissed that he's dead forever. Because that could have been something. And I didn't even get to meet his wife before he left. And so I felt guilty about wanting to go there to introduce me. Oh, I'm the atheist who, had lunch with your husband. And so I didn't go. I think it was the right decision given what was in my mindset at the time because I was pissed. But in hindsight, I wish I'd have gone. People change their mind. And every time I hear people say, why are you wasting your time? You're never going to change you're not going to change their minds. His mind changed. My mind changed. Raise your hand if your mind changed. I have a friend, Keith Lowell Jensen, who is a comedian, and he does that at a lot of his shows. And he's like, I think we were worth talking to. And I do too. So thanks.
So who had an incredible night with Seth and Matt?
Please know, if I may, what a gift all of you are to two activists who spend a lot of time producing, but we don't get nearly enough time connecting in environments like this to hear your stories. We just did a FaceTime with someone who was in Japan, and his mother was a believer and caught one of our videos and started a journey and finished her life a free thinker living on her own terms. And as her son was telling the story, he broke into tears, and I was almost joking. I mean, this was during the intermission just now. Please know, none of us are taking this journey by ourselves. All of us could raise our hand if we thought, well, is there someone who encouraged me or who reminded me I wasn't alone or that I'm not crazy, or was there someone who produced something that I saw one time, or did he published a book, or bumped into me at the office, or just reminded me that it's okay, I'm not alone, I'm not crazy, I'm not alone, I'm not crazy, I'm not alone, I'm not crazy. I want us to have been that for you today. I want you to look around the room, and I want you to see like-minded faces, people who get you, people who will not judge you, people who are your family and community when your regular bio family will not be. I hope you have, if nothing else, take away from tonight a reminder that we are part of the single fastest rising demographic in the United States, the non-religious. People are walking away from it; they don't need it. But I'll tell you, we still need each other. And I hope tonight you will know that I need you. Matt and I both are tremendously thankful for you, your participation, your presence, what you do here in the Phoenix area and far beyond, the activism that you have in your own life, the bravery that you show with your family, your friends, your community, your employers. You are part of the positive change. You are part of a transformation that's taking place in the United States. Despite the difficulties, you are helping to change the world. Be encouraged. You are making a difference. I hope you take that message home with you tonight. And thank you all very, very much for coming.